Johnny watched as each breath he exhaled formed into a miniature cloud. He imagined small lightning bolts streaking out of some, while others produced tiny blizzards. Then he imagined teeny people under those clouds, weathering the storms with teenier umbrellas. "Why does it do that?" Emmy said. Johnny started. "What?" Emmy came out the door. "Why can we see our breath when it's cold outside?" Gathering his book bag, he followed her off the porch, away from their homes on Mongolian Lane, and down the road toward school. "Well, we all have a lot of moisture in our lungs, and in winter there's less moisture in the air, so when your warm breath hits the cold air, the moisture condenses into little droplets of water. It's the same way clouds form." "You just made that up," Emmy teased. "Nope. Ask Mr. Bustamount." "I did ask him last week. He just said the best way to learn was to find out for myself." She frowned and added, "I don't think he knew." They walked quietly for a while, stepping intentionally on all the ice puddles along the way. It became a contest, but Emmy quickly built a lead. Out of the corner of his eye, Johnny spotted a symbol that looked like two W's scratched into the fence. He stopped to look at it. "What's wrong?" Emmy asked. "Have you noticed these symbols popping up around town?" Emmy shrugged. "No." "No? Why?" "I'm just curious. I don't remember seeing them before." He reached out to touch the scrawl in the wood when a German shepherd on the opposite side of the fence jumped against it, snarling, barking, and snapping. Johnny kept leaping back, and Emmy laughed. Crazy dog, you scared me half to death!" he exclaimed. "Really, I couldn't tell." They resumed walking. "Hey, you're still planning on coming over tonight for our Halloween party, aren't you?" she asked. Johnny nodded. "Yeah, in fact, I'm trying out my costume right now. Can you see it?" "You're coming as a schoolboy?" she said. "That's disappointing." "No." He pulled back his left coat sleeve. His arm was green from the wrist to the elbow. "What do you think of this?" "You're coming as a pickle?" "Very funny. I developed a compound that once I'm adequately exposed to the sun should make me bioluminescent." "I have no idea what that means." Emmy pouted, still distracted by looking for ice puddles. Johnny smiled proudly. "It means I'll glow." That got her attention. Emmy stopped in her tracks. You mean like a firefly?" Yeah, though I'm not planning I'm not planning to be a bug. I'm dressing up like Moses when he came down from the mountain with the 10 Commandments. If you believe in that sort of thing. Emmy looked confused. Of course. Doesn't everybody? Johnny gave her a furtive glance, but decided not to press the topic. What's your costume? He asked. I'm going as Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz. It's my favorite book. You'll need a Toto. Want me to bring Macduff? Johnny offered. He actually does look like Toto, she said brightly. Yeah, that would be great. He watched her crunch another ice puddle. She was far ahead in the ice puddle crunching contest, 35-17, but it didn't matter. His heart was not in the game, nor was his mind. Both were centered on the cloth. He wondered about the history of it. Where did it come from? How could a cloth heal anybody? How did it come to be in his family possession? Why wasn't it in a museum or being studied by scientists who could harness its power to help people with it? The inventor inside of him wondered if he could be that person to do that. He could make a name for himself and be famous and the discovery could end, and his discovery could end all sickness. The thought of it made him feel exhilarated and nervous. So much responsibility and so much power. He began to imagine his life as a Nobel Prize winning physician, traveling the globe and healing diseases in India and Africa and China and the South Pacific. He was in a mid-trance when he caught Emmy looking at him with that look she often wore, part curiosity, part sympathy. Where are you? She asked. I'm right next to you, though a few seconds ago I was in the South Pacific. She shook her head and murmured, Boys, daydreaming, when you should be concerned about more important things. More important than developing a cure for every sickness, he thought. Instead he asked, such as? Figuring out some way you could come trick-or-treating, she answered. It'll be a perfect night for it. Johnny didn't respond. Why won't you ask your dad? She added. Maybe he'll let you go after all. I doubt it. My dad doesn't usually change his decisions. It doesn't hurt to ask, does it? Doesn't help either. My dad's about as pliable as a steel rod, he said aloud. Well, you're pretty clever. How can you bend a steel rod? It would take a lot of force. Or a way to make it look like it was bent, Emmy suggested. Johnny scrunched his eyebrows. What do you mean? She looked at him as if he were being silly. You're the scientist, she said. How do you make a solid object appear to be bent? He thought for a minute. And then the light bulb went on. Refraction? By bending light? Say, through a prism? Or even water? You can make rigid objects appear to be bent when the only thing actually bending is the light itself. See? I knew you'd figure it out, she said, smiling. But how does refraction help me change Dad's mind about trick-or-treating? He pressed. They had arrived at the school's doors. Emmy looked down at Johnny's green-tinted arm. A cloud passed overhead, and his limb began to softly glow. Like I said, you're the scientist. She turned and walked inside, calling back, You'll figure it out, too. Johnny thought for a moment, and an idea crept into his mind. It would mean a trade-off, sharing something he knew, but didn't want to share for something he wanted to do but couldn't. However, it just might be what he needed to make his father's steel rod mind more pliant. Chapter 6. 7 hours later, Johnny put refraction into action. He walked into the religious studies department of the Humanitarian College at Duke University and up to the front desk. An angular woman sporting black-horned rimmed glasses and a blue paisley dress looked up from her typing as he approached. Her smile was punctuated by two symmetrical dimples, one on each side of her mouth. Can I help you with something, dear? I'm pretty sure you're not a student here. Too young, she said with a wink. I'm Professor Harold Whitaker's son. I'd like to see him, Johnny replied. Oh! She adjusted her glasses and examined him more closely. Now you mention it, I do see the resemblance. She giggled and held out her hand. I'm Mrs. Drexler, Department Secretary. Nice to meet you. They shook. Her hand was clammy. You know where your father's office is, I expect? Actually, no, ma'am. This is my first time here. We haven't lived here very long. I've wanted to come, but... Mrs. Drexler's phone rang. She reached for it and said, Take the first right, then the second left. It's 3 offices down. His name's on the door. I don't know if he's there, though. I think he's teaching a class. She picked up the phone. Religious Studies Department, Mrs. Drexler speaking. How may I help you? As she continued to talk, Johnny walked down the hallway. His footsteps echoed along the reverberant passage. The occasional sound of voices rumbled behind the closed doors, and a stray student walked quickly down an intersecting passage. Otherwise, the hallway seemed deserted. A shaft of light glimmered through a window perched high on the outermost east wall. Flecks of dust floated lazily, eventually landing on the hardwood floor planks, only to rise again as he trod on them. Johnny had taken the right turn, and was about to make a left turn when he saw a placard on the door that bore a familiar name, Dr. Carl Mangle. A rush of ideas flooded Johnny's mind. Mangle knew about the cloth, and he had been searching for the journal. He knew about its power to heal, and he had translated the ancient text for Harold. He must have loads of books that tell about the cloth. Johnny thought. He looked up and down the hallway. Deserted. The only thing standing between him and possible answers was the door in front of him. He knocked softly. No answer. He tested the knob. Unlocked. He hesitated. Should he go in? Sure, he and Ben had broken into Providence Town Hall, which led to his solving the mystery of the Confederate gold, but that had gotten Ben arrested. Besides, sneaking into someone's private office seemed different somehow. If he got caught... He debated with himself for a few more seconds, and then decided it was worth the risk. He quietly turned the knob and peeked inside the room. Empty. He took a deep breath, slipped inside, and gently closed the door behind him, his heart racing. The room looked like a library. Hundreds of books lined the bookshelves on every wall, from floor to ceiling. More books were scattered in piles on the floor, in chairs, and on the desk. There were more books here than in his father's inner sanctum, and that was saying something. Immediately to his right was what looked like a small antechamber. Mangle used to store even more books, along with office supplies, a coffee pot, a bottle of clear liquid, and a few boxes of cookies, and a jar of Tootsie Rolls. Another door in the antechamber led to a small restroom. Johnny moved to the shelves and scanned a few titles. The Elysian Mysteries, 12 lectures on the connection between science and revealing religion. Historian Corlandris discovering the ruins of Nevada and Babylon, the tomb of Tutankhamen, the Book of the Dead, in Thrusarcum Antiquitantum Fragmenta. Johnny wasn't sure what he had expected, but most of these titles were way beyond him. Many were in differing languages, and even English books read like a foreign language. He pulled one, then another from the shelf. If a title looked as though it could be even remotely connected to the cloth, he wished there were an encyclopedia that translated dense books like these into regular people's language, but he found none among the books lining Mangle's shelf. After searching about 10 minutes, he was ready to give up when he saw the corner of a note sticking out of the top of a book, buried under a stack of papers. Journey through Arabia Petrea to Mount Sinai and the eternal city of Pateria. The of the prophecies. The note corner had a lone word visible on it. Nemanad, one of those words from his ancient journal. He opened the book and pulled out the note. It was the translation of the phrase that Emmy had asked Harold to translate for her, confirmation that Harold had given it to Mangle. Nemanad Fridor Prism Bretha Fadar. Directly below it was scrawling another phrase. Mapapiyatape the Yuns Tinus Pangwa. The scratching looked familiar, though he couldn't say why. Other phrases followed, but he couldn't make heads or tails of any of them. There were several names listed: Lucian, Sir William, the Order of the Holy Speckler, Sir Gawain Mac Ulunatang. He decided to copy everything down, so he opened the desk drawer to search for a piece of paper. Just then, he heard a muffled voice outside the door, calling to someone in the hallway. Johnny quickly shut the desk drawer, shoved the paper back into the book, and the book back under the stack of papers, and ran to the door. Just as he got there, the knob turned, and the door thrust open. Johnny lurched sideways to stay behind it. Carl Mangle entered, mumbling to himself. Johnny hoped against hope that Mangle would not close the door behind him. Mangle didn't, but he continued mumbling to himself. Mein sieht Verschwünschen. No interest in breaking out of their liner thinking. He walked toward his desk, and the door began to swing shut on its own. Johnny caught it and pulled it back to conceal his presence. Fortunately, Mangle was so preoccupied he didn't notice. Johnny heard Mangle sit down at his desk and ruffle through some papers. Then Mangle gasped. "Where is it? I left it here." Footsteps entered from the hallway. "Where is what?" It was Johnny's father. Mangle composed himself a bit. "Oh, hello, Whittaker. A paper I've written. The demise of Roman influence in North America in the 7th century. "Sounds interesting," Harold said, and Johnny thought he actually meant it. Johnny heard his father walk away from the door and up to Mangle's desk. "Speaking of misplacing things, I looked again last night, and I still can't find it," Harold said. "What?" "The book on Scottish history? Silly of me to misplace it, but I am a bit absent-minded, Fiona tells me." "Don't insult me, Harold." Mangle snapped. "I know the phrase didn't come from that book." "Oh? Where did it come from, then?" Johnny marveled. "Oh? Where did it come from, then?" Johnny marveled at how calm his father could remain, even when caught in a lie. There was a long pause before Mangold said, "It doesn't matter." Johnny took a chance and peeked around the door's edge. His father's back was to him, obscuring Mangold from view. Harold said, "You seem a little testy today, Carl. Is everything all right?" Mangold bolted up from his desk, red-faced. Johnny pulled back the door. "In Germany, I would say, da best sich die Kassen in den Schwarz, which in English means the cat is biting her own tail. Things are going in circles without getting resolved." "Nothing serious, I hope." "Things with my wife are, shall we say, strained. Plus I've had a few investment setbacks and the doctor bills are piling up." "How's your boy?" Mangold's chair squeaked as he plopped back down into it. "Getting weaker and weaker. It's only a matter of time. This disease is gruesome, cruel." He stopped gathering his emotions. The irony is that someday he'll get some little problem like a cold, and his body will not be able to fight it off. The cold, because pneumonia. The cold becomes pneumonia, and a young boy dies. It makes no sense. "No, it sure doesn't," Harold agreed gravely. Fiona and I are praying for Steve and your whole family. We may not be able to make sense of it, but at least God knows." Johnny blinked. Professor Mangold was Steve and Paul's father? A tone of disgust laced Mangold's words. "I know you teach theology, Whittaker, but I don't suppose you actually believed it." "You don't? You're a professor of religious languages, after all." "It is my field of study, not my lifestyle." "Well, if anything would prompt me to search for God, it would be a sick child." "If there was such a thing as God, we wouldn't have to search for him. We wouldn't have diseases that kill children, or hurricanes that destroy towns, or people starving because of drought. Or mothers taken away from their sons," thought Johnny, and he was instantly uncomfortable that he and Mangold actually agreed on the topic of God. Mangold exhaled, trying to recompose himself. "Religion has its place, Whittaker. But the answer to our questions has and always will come from Wissenschaft, science." "I appreciate the value of science. It's one more component to help me understand God." "Achtung! Then you agree that both are necessary?" "Of course." Johnny peered around the door again, hoping for a moment he could sneak around and get out without being seen.
but Mangle was standing, his hands on his desk, leaning toward his father. "Tell me, have you ever heard of COSU?" Harold instinctively frowned. "You mean the Center of Scientific Understanding?" Mangle's eyes widened. "You do know it! I'm impressed. At least you read more than just the Bible." "The Bible is science, history, anthropology, psychology, political science, and religion. You could make an argument for a few other core studies as well." Ja, 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 Mangle said dismissively. He walked around the desk and sat on its edge. I've been applying for membership with the COSU, Whitaker. It's very difficult to get in. You have to prove a breakthrough in one of the fields of study to garner any interest. They focus primarily on longevity, don't they? They do, but they're also so engaged in advanced forms of medical science. Some conventional, others less so. Meaning? Mangle leaned in. There are many ways to achieve the same result. What if one of those ways is something people would consider, shall we say, bizarre? A wry smile spread across Harold's face. Sounds as if you're talking about how some people view faith. Mangle nodded. Ja. As I say, religion has its place. But I consider this. What if the thing you call faith were actually the result of an explainable scientific fact? What if there were a scientific reason for why Jesus could heal people? Such as? Harold asked. Such as a chemical or electrical interaction unique to his body chemistry that interacted with other people's body in a way that destroyed disease. I would say that if that were proved to be true, it wouldn't change the fact that God made it possible. God can't. So, to prove such a theory would serve the scientists and the theologians' purposes, would it not? Harold mused for a moment. What are you suggesting, Carl? Mangle stood and walked to the window. His back was to the door, as was Harold's. Johnny saw the chance to get out. He snuck around the door and quickly tiptoed out. Halfway through, he heard Mangle say, I believe you know where the journal is. Johnny stopped in the hallway, waiting to hear his father's answer. Suddenly, a voice down the hall called out, Did you find him? It was Miss Dressler. Johnny didn't know what to do, but he just smiled and waved and ran toward his father's office. Finally, taking the left turn in the hallway, he stopped and peered around the corner to see Mrs. Dressler shrug and walk back to her desk. He then saw Mangle poke his head out of his door and in Mrs. Dressler's direction. Johnny quickly ducked behind the wall and ran into his father's office. He plopped into the chair and desperately tried to catch his breath as his chest heaved, pounding with each pounding heartbeat. He turned his head to listen for the sound of approaching footsteps, praying that Professor Mangle had not caught him out. Chapter 7. Johnny sat listening for what seemed like an eternity, but in reality it had only been 10 minutes. No one had come. Perhaps he hadn't been seen after all. His father's office was laid out much like Mangle's, only quite a bit neater, and a few more books, and with fewer books on the shelves. On one of the wood-paneled walls hung several photographs, including a large print of the recently completed Duke Chapel, a beautiful Gothic edifice patterned after St. Vitus Cathedral in Prague, Czechoslovakia? Johnny's mind marveled at the incredible engineering needed to craft such an ornate, stately building. It seemed almost impossible. On another wall hung his father's diplomas. Undergraduate degree in English Literature, University of Aberdeen, 1920. Master of the Arts degree in Medieval and Renaissance History, University of Aberdeen, 1921. PhD in History of Theology with a thesis on Natural and Revealing Religions, University of St. Andrews, 1924. Johnny fidgeted, shifting in his chair, and finally stood and walked across the wood floor to his father's desk. It was strewn with papers, a book or two, a fountain pen, his father's hat lying crown down, and a half-eaten sandwich from what must have been lunch. Next to the sandwich, and particularly obscured by the hat, was a piece of paper that looked like the one he'd seen in Mangle's office. It had what appeared to be many of the same phrases written on it, though not all of them. The paper rested on an open book. Several phrases and names in the book had been underlined and circled. Holy Relics of Faith, Father Lucian, the Tomb of Gamaliel. He turned the book around to read in earnest when a voice startled him. John? Johnny jumped. Father! You startled me. Harold entered, his face stern. How did you get here? The bus, after school. Harold's brow furrowed. He glanced down at his desk, and then back at Johnny. Piercing eyes narrowed. What are you doing here? I just came to see you. Johnny walked up to his father. I need to tell you something. Harold took a breath and nodded. I need to tell you something too. He crossed to the desk and shifted a few papers and grabbed his hat. What say we walk to Warner's drugstore and talk over a chocolate soda? When his father turned, Johnny saw that the book he had been reading when Harold entered was now closed. Johnny nodded, working up the enthusiasm he didn't feel. "Sure, that'd be great." Mr. Warner fairly danced up to the booth where Johnny sat with his father. "And here," he said melodiously, "we have 2 Warner exclusive chocolate sodas. People have traveled the globe for one of these. I want you to know they're world famous." He set them on the table with a flourish. "Well, Johnny, here is a dual citizen, having been born in Scotland, so you can add us to the list of the world travelers seeking one." Harold said, "though we did only walk a few blocks to get here today." Warner laughed louder than the joke warranted. "I am honored to have you both. Bon appetit," he declared, and then he bounced into the back room. Johnny caught a whiff of an odor he'd never smelled before and wrinkled his nose. The odor was quickly displaced by the wonderful chocolatey smell of the soda. He pulled it in front of him, glancing at his father, and nodded toward Mr. Warner. "Is he always that happy?" "No," Harold replied with a frown. He dipped his straw into the glass and took a sip. Johnny did likewise. It was delicious. "Well, he sure makes a great soda." He sipped again, this time as slowly as he could without drawing attention to himself. He wanted to enjoy the soda, but he also knew that as soon as it was gone, he'd have to start talking. Then again, he thought, that is why I came. "What did you want to tell me?" Harold asked, taking the briefest of sips from his soda. Johnny gulped. I wanted to talk to you about the words that Emmy asked you to translate." He concentrated on his soda glass. "Yes, I wondered when you'd own up to that." Johnny looked up quickly. "You knew I asked her to do it?" Harold smiled faintly. "I wasn't born yesterday. Your friend Emmy is bright, but she doesn't seem the type to be interested in old Scots Gaelic." How snobby, thought Johnny. But he said aloud, "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because you didn't. I figured you'd come to me when the time was right." Harold took a sip of his soda and then set it aside. "So, since the time is obviously right, that must mean you have more questions that need answering, yes?" Questions?" Harold looked squarely into his eyes. "About the journal." Johnny's heart began pounding. How did his father do that? He seemed to have a knack for being able to read Johnny's thoughts. Sometimes Johnny felt that, as hard as he may try, There was nothing he could do he could truly hide from his father. Johnny breathed deeply, hoping the air would supply enough oxygen to clear his head. I'm not sure what you mean, he said as nonchalantly as possible. Don't lie to me, John. I know you're still flush with success from your last adventure, but I won't brook lying from you. Leaning forward, he added, You have information about the journal. Do you know where it is? There was no escaping the question. Johnny set his soda glass aside and took a deep breath. I found it in the trunk Grandpa Jackson gave me. Harold leaned back and nodded slowly, suddenly so deep in thought that Johnny could almost see words appear over his father's head. He knew what was coming next. What else is in the journal? Harold asked. A lot of entries, some in Latin and Greek, and some in other languages. You said the ones Emmy gave you were Old Scots Gaelic, correct? I think those were Grandpa Jackson's entries. You don't think he wrote them all? Johnny shrugs. I don't know. Maybe. But it looks like different styles of handwriting and different ink. Harold didn't flinch. He simply nodded and said, I see. Well, if you want, I can take the book and have it translated for you. By Professor Mangle? Harold's eyes narrowed. Now why would you say that? Johnny looked down. In for a penny, in for a pound. That day when Professor Mangle came to the house, I overheard your conversation in the study about the meanings of phrases. He didn't mention that he had also just overheard them talking in Mangle's office at the university. His father frowned, and Johnny added quickly, I wasn't snooping, honest. I just went into the house for something and heard you both talking. Harold considered him for a long moment. I'm not sure Carl is the right man for this job. I know another gentleman who would do it, if you like. Johnny felt relieved, though he wasn't sure why. I'll think about it, if that's okay. Harold nodded. It's up to you. Johnny retrieved his soda and took another sip. Then Harold added, Don't you want to know what I need to tell you? Johnny stopped mid-sip. It wasn't that you knew about Emmy and the words? No. Not just that, no, he responded. Johnny pushed away his soda. Then what? The cloth. A chill went down Johnny's spine. He knew Harold was aware of the existence of the cloth, but he didn't know how much he knew. He'd have to be very careful. Harold went on. If you listened to the conversation between Carl and myself at the house, you must have heard him talk about the cloth. Yes, sir, I did. Well, as you saw, on my desk, Harold peered at him over the top of his wire-rimmed glasses. I've been doing my own research on what Carl said. I found that resource in the university library. My intention was to learn the full history of the story before having the conversation with you. Because if that cloth can be located through the clues in your journal, well, imagine what that might mean. Johnny forced himself to remain calm. As far as he could tell, his father didn't know the cloth may actually be upstairs in their house, in the trunk, or about what happened to Macduff, or how the cloth may have killed the dog. So what did he know? But, Dad, how could a piece of cloth actually heal someone? Harold's eyebrows rose. You didn't hear that part of our conversation. You didn't hear that part of our conversation? Johnny shook his head. I went back outside. I don't know whether to be impressed or annoyed, Harold muttered. What's the good of snooping? What's the good of snooping if you're not going to hear the entire conversation? I wasn't. Harold held a hand up. All right. I need to find out more information before I can answer your question. And a good place to start would be with that journal. He adjusted his glasses. But, as I said, it's up to you. Johnny frowned. He didn't like this idea, but he needed to know what was in the journal, especially why his name was written in it. He regarded his father intensely. It's my journal, right? It is. You'll give it back to me when you've looked over it. I will. Johnny took a deep breath. Then, okay. But you'll tell me everything you find out, right? Yes, John. Yes, John. Harold snapped. What? Don't you trust me? Johnny's thoughts about the only people in Providence he could trust flickered through his mind, and he felt a sudden pang of guilt and sadness that his father wasn't among them. But he couldn't tell Harold that. What son would tell his father he didn't trust him? Even if he actually didn't. He forced a grin. I do. I'm just kind of wound up by all this stuff in an excited way. Harold's stern expression broke, and he actually smiled. I understand. Johnny slowly pulled his soda back and took one last long sip. It slurped in the bottom of the glass. He needed a bit of reinforcement for what he was about to ask, which he knew was a sore spot for Harold. Dad? Why do you think Grandpa wanted me to have the trunk and not you? Harold stiffened, but replied calmly. He said he just believed It was what he needed to do. Is it what you believed he needed to do? Harold folded his hands, rested them on the table, and looked down at them. I believe I needed to abide by your grandmother's wishes. Johnny nodded. Harold took a breath, called Mr. Warner, and asked for the check. On the house, the old man called back merrily. For my Scottish friends, may the wind be at your backs, he declared with a wave of his hand. I need to grab my briefcase at the office before we head home, Harold said as they rose from the table, then added pointedly, and the book you were snooping through, too. Chapter 8. The walk back to the university campus was unexpectedly pleasant. Harold even had a bounce in his steps, as if Mr. Warner's giddiness had rubbed off on him. Time for refraction. Dad, you do remember that it's Halloween tonight? All Hallows' Eve, you mean? Harold corrected. Yeah, and you said I could go to Emmy's party. I remember, though I thought maybe now you'd want to stay home. Instead, to go through the journal. Don't you think we should keep doing normal stuff, though? So people won't be suspicious? Yes, Harold mused. Just in case, I suppose we should go on with business as usual. I was thinking, maybe I should go trick-or-treating with the other kids, so as not to draw attention to myself. I mean, I'd probably be the only kid in town not going. Johnny acted as nonchalant as possible. Don't you think Fiona will get suspicious about that? Tactical mistake, though. Tactical mistake, thought Johnny. I just blew it. But whether it was because of the chocolate sodas, chocolate sodas were Harold's weakness, or more likely because he was going to get to see the journal, he looked at Johnny and said, All right, you can go with your friends, but no mischief. Do I make myself clear? Yes, sir. Johnny instantly agreed, stifling a smile, trying desperately to break over his face. Nonchalant, stay nonchalant, he thought. His father's expression resumed its usual stern and unbending manner. And don't think you pulled one over on me, young man. I know how your mind works. He paused, then, with a twinkle in his eye, added, because it's a lot like mine. At that, Johnny couldn't hold the smile back any longer. It beamed on his face. Not a bad tactic, that. His father added, sporting a bit of a smile. A few minutes later, father and son entered Harold's office. Harold grabbed the folder on his desk containing student reports he had to grade later, the research book, and a few other things, and stuffed them into his briefcase. Let's get out of here, he said. The rotary phone on Harold's desk rang loudly. He grimaced but answered. Harold Whittaker, he said. A pause. Oh. Yes, hello. He cupped his hand over the receiver. I'll just be a minute, John. Wait out in the hall. Yes, sir.
Harold resumed his conversation, and Johnny walked out and gently closed the door behind him. A voice startled him. What do we have here? Indringling, a trespasser. Johnny turned to see Professor Mangle walking toward him. Oh, no, sir. I was just here seeing my dad. You're Harold's boy, eh? Johnny, isn't it? I don't know. You don't look much like him. You sure you're not here to steal university secrets? Johnny's heart sank. No. Mangle laughed. Acht, sure to see. I'm only kidding. Where's your father? He's on the phone. Don't look so frightened, young man. I don't bite. Johnny forced a smile. You startled me. I thought everyone would have gone home by now. This is a university. No matter how many hours I work in a day, it's never enough. Johnny suddenly felt uncomfortable, though he wasn't sure why. Mangle had helped his father get this job. They were old friends, or at least acquaintances. Still, there was something disquieting about this man. Are you feeling all right, Johnny? Mangle inquired. Yes, sir. Why? Your arm. It's green. Oh, that's a compound I developed. It's part of my Halloween costume for tonight. It'll make me glow. Mangle's eyes brightened. Bioluminescence? I'm impressed. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, does it? Johnny grinned feebly, wishing his father would hurry and finish his phone call. Suddenly, for a split second, he saw something in Mangle's eyes. It was only a flicker, but it was unmistakable there. He couldn't attach a word to the expression or even explain what it looked like, only how it made him feel. Vulnerable. But as quickly as it came, it was gone again, replaced by cordial vulgarity. You know, we don't live that far. Well, no. We don't live that far apart. Of course, no one in Providence lives far away from anyone else. Am I right? I'm on the south side of Granville. You should come by tonight. We have loads of treats. Johnny blinked. You live by the old Granville house. Ach, ja. I'm afraid so. That eyesore ruins my view, not to mention my valuable property. Professor Mangle, have you seen a boy hanging around that place about my age? Mangle thought for a second. My boys are about your age. Well, Paul is anyway. Steve would be a few years older. I met them the other day. I didn't know you were their father. Oh, where did you meet them? Johnny hesitated. By the river. I was working on an experiment down there. Mangle sported a crooked smile. They didn't mention you by name either. But putting the pieces together, I assume Paul's virgin hair and eyebrows were the result of your bioluminescent concoction. Johnny blushed lightly.
Uh, yeah, sorry about that. Mangle chuckled. Nine, not at all. The boys liked you. Do please come by our place tonight. We'll load up your bag mince wunderbar treats on. Then you can tell all venture out together. We're at 236 Cluster Avenue, 2 blocks below Granville House. The door to the office opened and Harold stepped out. Still here, Carl? He said. Just leaving when I ran into your son, he responded. I'll see you tonight then, Johnny? He nodded. Yes, sir. Fantastic. Gut Nacht, he said with a nod, walking down the hallway. Harold and Johnny walked the opposite way. What was that about? He asked. I met his kids the other day. I just told him I'd go trick-or-treating with them tonight. I see. Harold hesitated for a few moments, then added, John, don't tell anyone about the journal or the cloth, all right? The fewer people who know about them, the better. How about Fiona? Not even her. Harold said. Then he frowned. You haven't told anyone else about any of this, have you? No, sir. Only you. At least Johnny didn't think anyone else knew. Emmy didn't ask where the words came from, and the one unknown person who found Macduff when Johnny had run off to get things to patch up the dog, whoever that was, might have seen the cloth. He couldn't be sure, and he decided not to tell his father until he was sure. And whatever we learn about the journal, you won't tell Professor Mangle about it, right? And whatever we learn about the journal, you won't tell Professor Mangle about it, right? Johnny asked. He wasn't sure why he asked. It came out before he knew it. Harold nodded. No, as I told you, Carl's not the man for this job. I have a contact in England, a man well versed in logistics. I think it would be wise to send the journal to him to translate. Johnny came to a full stop. You want to mail the journal overseas? It'll be perfectly safe. I trust this man. Either we send the journal to him or he comes here. There's no other way to get it translated properly. Johnny wasn't sure what to think. What if the journal got lost? Or what if the man his father intended to send it to wasn't as trustworthy as he thought? And Johnny hesitated to allow the final question to enter his mind. What if his father had bigger plans than he was admitting? He seemed to be saying all the right things, but his father was skilled in convincing people to do what he wanted. Sometimes it came through clever reasoning. Other times, through sheer force. Convincing Johnny to give him the journal felt like a little bit of both. Harold pushed open the exit door, and he and Johnny walked outside with the cool, overcast autumn afternoon. Into the cool, overcast autumn afternoon. They reached the black Ford Victoria Model 18, opened the door, hopped in, and drove away. From a distance, peering around the corner of the facility building, Professor Carl Mangle watched as the sedan puttered down the road. Chapter 9. John Avery! Charlotte Marie! Fiona called. Hurry along, you two. The children will be arriving any minute. Johnny opened the door to his room, and his stepsister Charlie raced by him and traipsed down the stairs in her Bible costume. He held back to make a more dramatic entrance, but he could hear the conversion below. Charlie decided she would be Queen Esther this year, though the costume was the same as last year when she was Ruth.
It's not fair that Johnny gets to go trick-or-treating tonight and I don't,
she pouted. Fiona adjusted Charlie's collar.
We've been through this already, child. John Avery is older than you.
She paused and then added, and obviously your father doesn't care about how the celebration of evil will affect his son's heart and mind. Harold winced. They're going out for candy, that's all, he said, and he promised me he wouldn't prank anyone. It's not that different from gussing, and we still celebrate that. Yes, and Duncan for apples too. But gushing like we grew up doing in Scotland has nothing to do with evil, and you know it. We pray together and sing songs and recite poems or jokes. It's special. Here they dress up like witches and goblins and such. How do you suppose the good Lord feels about glorifying those things? Well, our children won't dress up like that. Charlie here is a beautiful little Ruth.
Queen Esther, Daddy,
she clarified. Pardon me, Your Highness. And by the way, thank you for saving the Jewish people. And John? Where is John? Right here! Johnny said, moving majestically down the Sinai stairs. And entering the room, he wore a mop as a wig. And the mop handle was his staff. And he had stuck cotton balls to his face for a beard, and wore his father's old brown bathrobe as his tunic. In his hands were 2 pieces of wood painted gray with words 10 Commandments painted on them. You certainly do make an imposing Moses, Fiona bragged. Turn off the lights, Johnny told Charlie. She did, and the oohs and the ahs filled the room as he walked around, moving toward his father.
You're glowing,
Charlie exclaimed. Absolutely radiant, Fiona agreed. Johnny stopped in front of Harold, his back to Fiona and Charlie. Dad, what do you think? He pulled the journal from between the commandments boards and passed it reluctantly to his father, who took it and slipped it into his clothes. Luminous, Harold said with a nod. Quite enlightening. Johnny nodded back and said, I'm just glad it works. I don't know how long it'll last, though. I'd better soak up as much light as I can. He switched the lights back on. Neither he nor Harold looked at each other. Charlie
moped.
Johnny's going to get loads of treats and candy, and I'm not going to get anything.
I can tell you one thing, you will get if you keep that up, said Harold sternly. You can have some of my stuff, Charlie, Johnny offered.
And I'll tell you what, Fiona added, bending down to Charlie's eye level.
If you'll be very good and join me in helping me pass out the sword cakes to the kids who come to our door, I might take you horseback riding with me tomorrow.
That got her attention.
Did you buy a horse, Mama?
No, dear, but I did meet our neighbors. The woman is very nice, and she has 4 horses and a couple of donkeys to boot. Her name is Eleanor, and she's kindly offered that I and anyone I wish to bring along with me may ride at any time. Isn't that grand?
Very grand,
Charlie excitedly answered.
Can I come too?
Johnny asked.
We haven't gone riding together in months.
No, this is
only for me,
Charlie said simply.
'Cause I can't go trick-or-treating.
Right you are, Charlotte, Fiona agreed. Just then there was a knock at the door. Ouch! Our first visitor! Nary a bless you, to be heard. Fiona said, "Would you care to do the honors, my girl?" Charlie ran to the door. Once out of earshot of her, Fiona whispered to Johnny, "Don't worry, lad. I'll take you riding next time. But only if you take a slow horse. I cannot keep up with you master riders." She tousled his mop of hair, and they all followed Charlie to the door. Several children waited expectantly on the porch. "Trick or treat!" they yelled in unison. "Goodness, don't you all look wonderful?" Fiona gushed. "A pirate, a princess, a clown, and... What are you, dear?" The little girl, no more than 5, shyly answered,
"A kitty."
"Oh, of course you are. How silly of me." Fiona said, "Well, we don't celebrate Halloween in our house, but fortunately we do celebrate All Hallows Eve, the night before All Saints' Day, when we remember and pray for the souls of the Christian faithful who have passed away and gone to glory." The kids just stared at her. "Oh, and we also hand out these." At which point Charlie handed a small round cake to each of the children. "Are these cookies?" the pirate boy asked. "No, lad, they're soul cakes. They do look a little like cookies, I suppose, and they're delicious." The children thanked them and wandered on to the next house. Johnny looked at the clock. 7:20. He needed to get going to the Mangles' house so he could join up with Steve and Paul to do their own trick-or-treating. He grabbed his staff and a pillowcase to carry his plunder and called for Macduff. The dog lazily responded, taking his merry old time. "We're going to have to work on your training," Johnny scolded him. "Come on," he huffed. walking to the door. He was about to open it to leave when a heavy hand knocked on the other side. He wondered if it would be Emmy. She always knocked hard. He hadn't told her he could go out yet. For all she knew, he would just be going to her party later. If she came by to rub it in, she'd have a surprise waiting for her. Johnny opened the door and found out that the surprise was on him. It wasn't Emmy on the porch, but a grown man. "Trick or treat," the fellow said tentatively. He was black, dressed like a hobo, wearing a tattered old coat and a threadbare hat. The gray hair exploded from under the hat was dirty and unkempt. Even his scruffy beard looked the part of the homeless bums down by the railroad tracks. Kids who dressed up like hobos had used coffee grounds. This guy looked like the real deal. Fiona and Harold walked up behind Johnny. "May I help you? May I help you?" "I saw you giving out food to those kids. I wondered if you might have any left for a fella down on his luck," the man asked, hat now in hand. "You mean you're a real hobo?" Johnny queried. "You're not just trick-or-treating." The man lowered his gaze. "That's right." Harold frowned. "John, you should get going." Johnny noticed the look on his father's face. "Oh, right. Sorry, mister. I didn't mean anything by it." "No reason to be sorry, boy. You couldn't know." The man said. Now with a curious, thrilling sort of laugh, he added, On a night like this, nothing seems real." Johnny walked out the door and past the man. As he stepped off the porch, he heard Fiona invite the hobo inside. "I'll make up a plate for you, mister." "Just call me Clarence, ma'am," he said as the door closed behind him. It was a glorious night, perfect for trick-or-treating, or so Johnny imagined.